Live from London, this is BBC News. Vigils in Israel and around the world a year on from the October the 7th attacks when Hamas gunmen killed 1,200 people and took 251 hostages. At the Nova Festival site, pictures of some of the missing and dead, many of whose families gathered to mark today's anniversary. Meanwhile, multiple blasts have shaken the southern suburbs of Beirut. The attacks come after Israel issued new evacuation orders in southern Lebanon. Israel's military is investigating how rockets fired by Hezbollah penetrated Israel's air defences overnight, hitting the city of Haifa. One other headline, Florida braces itself for another potentially devastating hurricane as Storm Milton builds strength off the Gulf of Mexico. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. Memorial events are taking place in Israel and around the world to remember the victims of the Hamas attacks on Israel exactly 1 year ago today, in which nearly 1,200 people were killed and 251 were taken hostage. In Israel, shortly after daybreak, President Herzog joined a memorial service at the scene of the Nova Music Festival, marking the moment it came under attack. Well, the time was 6:29 a.m. when southern Israel woke to the sound of sirens along the Gaza border. Only a few moments later, sirens sounded in Tel Aviv and nearby cities in central Israel. At 6:50 a.m., Hamas fighters breached the border fences, entering Israeli communities and launching attacks in multiple locations. By 8:04 a.m, the Israeli army declared a state of alert for war and IDF soldiers began deploying to areas under attack. At 10:25 a.m, IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari announced Operation Swords of Iron. And before noon, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation from Tel Aviv, declaring that Israel was at war. Well, as fighting continued in southern Israel, by 3:41 in the afternoon, Israeli fighter jets began striking targets within Gaza. Well, let's start this hour with this report from Yolande Knell.
Sirens marked the exact moment a year ago when Israel's deadliest day began. Waves of Hamas fighters from Gaza led a bloody attack on a dance festival, army bases and villages, seizing hostages. This is a day of painful remembrance.
They destroyed our house and our life. Oh God, where
Hadass Calderon from Nir Oz going back to the home where her mother and niece were killed. Her son and daughter were kidnapped by Hamas and held for 52 days before they were released in a truce deal. But Hadass says they're still living the nightmare of the 7th of October. Her ex-husband, Ofer, is one of dozens of hostages stuck in Gaza, last seen alive in a tunnel by his daughter.
They know that every moment his life can be gone. Our life is in hold. We can't think about future, we can't think about nothing else.
Last year's shocking assault triggered the deadliest ever war against Palestinians. With relentless Israeli bombardment, most of Gaza's population forced from their homes. A humanitarian catastrophe. And every day brings new casualties. Last month, an Israeli airstrike hit the Yunus family home in Nusrat, killing Hussam, aged 6, and his grandmother.
I want to know why. We're civilians. We pose no threat.
Now in hospital, Ahmed Yunus tries to cheer his surviving children with memories of happier days. They've lost all they owned and are in constant pain.
I want my children and my wife to be treated. If I could, I would take them abroad. There is no safety. I hope from God that the war stops today before tomorrow.
But instead, the fighting is now spreading in the Middle East. And that leaves many Palestinians and Israelis desperately worried that world attention is shifting away from their suffering. Yolande Knell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a special cabinet meeting in Jerusalem today. He said Israel was changing the security reality in the region. Have a listen.
Members of the government, citizens of Israel, we are gathering today for a special morning meeting. 1 year ago, Hamas terrorists launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel, against the citizens of Israel. Shortly after that massacre, I said, we are in a war, not an operation. We will fight back with the force the enemy has never known. We are at war and we will win it. Since that black day, we have been fighting. This is a war for our existence, the war of resurrection. That is how I would like to officially call the war. We are changing the security reality of our region for the sake of our children, for the sake of our future, and to ensure what happened on October 7th will not happen again.
Well, with me in the studio is our Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abu-Alouf. And Rushdie, it is devastating for so many in the region because this changed so much this day a year ago.
Yes, exactly. At this day, it was as if it's a turning point in the history of this conflict. It started with a Hamas attack in the morning, was firing thousands of rockets, and very quickly we realized that this is one of the biggest attack by Hamas into the Israeli territory, and the retaliation will be huge from the Israeli side. And it was just like 24 hours when Israel started to bomb buildings and towers in Gaza. But what happened following 7th of October is a catastrophic for the Palestinians. I've been talking to many people since early in the morning and last night. Those who have access to the internet were posting on social media saying that it's a year of sadness, a year of displacement, a year of killing. About 42,000 people were killed according to the Hamas-run health ministry, and about 10,000 people are still missing under the collapsed building. But more important, 2/3 of the population are displaced in an area in southern Gaza, and those who even survived and left Gaza are also suffering because they became new refugees in Egypt and other countries.
And you touched on it, but so many people have been moved countless times with so much peril all around them.
Yes, and until now, this morning, the Israeli army issued another evacuation order to 3 different places in northern Gaza. They asked them to leave this area called Wadi Gaza South. And, you know, the area there is full of people. Even when I left about like 9 months ago, it was full of people and there was no place. People were living in the top of each other in that area and suffering from a lack of food and shelters, and especially with the winter is coming and more people might be displaced. I've met people who were displaced 5, 6, some of them are 7 times within this year.
We're going to play a piece in a moment or two by Jane Corbin that looks at just a couple of families, both sides of this conflict. We'll come to that in a moment, but you touched on it, that you and your family had to move. Just tell me at what stage, remind our viewers at what stage you were able to actually get out of Gaza and what you'd seen in the run-up to that.
Yeah, it was like 12th of October when Israel issued this general evacuation order to about 1 million people in Gaza. And then me and my family were among those about 1 million people left Gaza City and the north to the south. And we were stuck in Khan Yunis area. I've been reporting from the Nasser hospital and living in the hospital in a tent with my family until we got the chance in November to leave Gaza. But we left behind our family. My father is still living in Gaza, my sisters, and also a lot of colleagues who are journalists still covering the war in Gaza and not being able to go out. And since then, we are following the news in Gaza from Istanbul.
I'll talk later this half hour to Jan Egeland from the Norwegian Refugee Council, who, of course, is looking at some of the humanitarian effort because so many health workers have died in this last year, but so many journalists as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is too many different figures about, but there are over 100 journalists were killed in Gaza since the war, and this is equal the number of Palestinian journalists killed since 1967. They all killed in 1 year, and I can't remember in the modern history of a conflict where 100 journalists killed, and we have journalists who are arrested and people who are like injured. Some of them are treated outside, but they still suffer, you know, and their family are still in Gaza.
Well, Rushdie, thank you for being here on the programme. Let's turn to that piece I was referencing, because Panorama's Jane Corbin has been following two families affected by this conflict, one in Israel and one in Gaza, both living in the aftermath of the attacks and the war that followed.
A year ago, Doron Katz-Asher and her two daughters, Raz and Aviv, were staying at her mother's house in Nir Oz kibbutz. They were all taken hostage by Hamas. Doron kept a diary while she was held in Gaza.
I hope that if I will kill someone, will see this is my story.
She wrote to her husband Yoni about how much they were missing him.
עברו כבר שבועיים, אנחנו כל כך רוצות אליך הביתה, יוני. הבוקר והצהריים היו ממש קשים עבורי, אחרי לילה מלא בהפצצות. I'm crying, but not in front of the children.
The moment the family was taken hostage was filmed by Hamas and seen by Yoni.
Saw my wife. Some of the Hamas men put a cover on her head. I saw my girl Raz, purple dress, long golden hair.
As they were taken into Gaza, an Israeli helicopter was firing above them. Doron's mother was killed.
What do you think when you hear that? They were shot by their own side.
It's hard to discover that at the moment of truth and such horrifying moment, the danger was from the IDF helicopter. We need to tell ourselves the truth. And the truth is that in that day, all bets were off. Yeah, it was a chaos and all bets were off.
After 50 days in captivity, she and her children were released and returned to Israel.
Every day I look at them and I know that it's a miracle that they are here.
The UN estimates that at least 14 people were killed in friendly fire on October the 7th. In Gaza, too, life changed completely on that day.
When this war started, Dania's age was 11 months. She's turning 2 years very soon.
On October the 7th, Shrouk was living in Gaza City with her husband Rushdie Siraj as they came under Israeli bombardment. Rushdie, a filmmaker, started documenting life under siege.
It's very close. It's unbelievable. They just attack again and again, over and over. Huge airstrike around Tel Hawa area now.
The next morning, an Israeli strike hit the building. Rushdie was killed.
She's really young to comprehend what does it mean to lose a dear father. He would be always my best friend.
Since then, Shrouk has moved 4 times. She's now living in a camp in central Gaza.
There is no light by the end of this deep tunnel. They destroyed the buildings and also the near future of the Gazan people.
Well, Jane Corbin with that report. You can see more of that panorama. It's at 9 o'clock on BBC One. It is called October the 7th, 1 year on. Well, do stay with me, because here on the programme next I'll be talking to a reservist, Barak Deri, a reservist in the IDF Special Forces. He was one of the first soldiers to arrive at one of the kibbutzes. So we'll talk to Barak Deri here on the programme in a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News now. As promised, let's speak live on the programme to Barak Deri, who's a reservist in the IDF Special Forces. He was one of the first soldiers to arrive at Kibbutz Be'eri on the day, a year ago today, October the 7th. Barak, welcome here to the programme. I wonder if you could start by just telling our viewers where you were and how you heard of those events a year ago.
Well, I was at my house in Tel Aviv. It was just another typical Saturday morning, and I actually was receiving messages from my brothers. We are a family of 5, and 3 of my brothers were at the music festival at Nova Party. So the messages were messages of goodbye, saying goodbye and come to rescue us. One of them was injured, and the other 2 were hidden at the bushes while the terrorists attacked. So this is how I understood there is something big going on.
And what did you do next?
Usually when there is something like that, I'm going to my reserve unit, and that's exactly what I did. But as I got there, I went through the first task team and headed down towards my injured brother location. But as we head towards this location, I got from my commander order to go to Kibbutz Be'eri and not to go to my injured brother location.
So you were diverted en route to trying to get to your 2 brothers. Mm-hmm. So at that moment, you faced a choice, didn't you?
Yeah, it was the toughest decision I had to make in my life. But as we head down south, we saw the dead bodies on the side of the road, and I understood there is something like huge that we have never seen before.
So you were told, weren't you, as you were making that choice, that there was probably no hope for your brothers and to press on to go to the kibbutz. When you were told that, just take me through what you were thinking at that stage.
I thought that I felt sad, obviously, and during the entire fight in Kibbutz Be'eri, I had the sense that I lost my brothers, and I had to go through an intensive firefight with terrorists with this understanding in mind. But then again, it was not a day with sanity. So,
not a day with sanity. Tell me, when you got to the kibbutz, what did you find when you got there?
I think that everything that you guys report from the media and worse, children, women, men, elderly people in the streets, in their living rooms, in their child bedrooms, butchered with knives, with bullets. Don't want to be too graphic, but it reminds me stuff that we learned about in high school about the Holocaust, like the scenes that I've never seen before.
We've been listening to so many people from the variety of kibbutzes who've spoken how difficult it is actually to move on from the past, to actually be able to process it. They still haven't managed it. Would that be fair to say about yourself as well, in terms of processing what you actually saw that day?
I think it's going to take years to process what happened these days. I think too many people are having severe trauma. Not just the civilians, but also the correspondent. And it's going to take years for everyone to understand what the heck happened on October 7. I do know that it's going to be a memorial day that's going to last with us, definitely as Israelis, but I hope it's around the globe, because it was a global event, a global peace party with many nations involved.
Since that day itself, you were involved in some of the fighting in Gaza. You were very badly injured. Tell me about that.
Well, I joined the Gaza war, ever since the October 7 events, and we trying to seek for leads for the hostages, locations where they are. We went in and out for different places, and at one point we had huge firefight in a very small compound where I got blown up by a grenade, and as I landed the ground, I was shot several times in my legs. And I rushed into the hospital. Basically, they declared me dead, but I was able to miraculously survive this, and they, over a period of 7 days, they kept me alive, and here I am today.
I read that actually when you were being transported to the hospitals, the medics, am I right, stopped treating you because they thought there was no hope. It was only when you got to the hospital that somehow they managed to actually save you. How long did you end up staying in hospital?
Actually, I left the hospital 2 days before my arrival to the UK, which is October 2nd. I've been there for 11 months, and yeah, at the beginning it was a very traumatic experience as I endure pain for almost 24/7. You know, it's gradually getting better, but I will be disabled for the rest of my life. But I manage.
A couple of final questions, because you talked about fighting, trying to get to the hostages. In terms of how Israel is a year on, how much does that weigh on people that still so many hostages remain trapped?
Tremendously. This is the biggest pain that we have. I think that if there were no hostages, this war would look completely different. But for us as a nation that see life as the most sacred thing, it's just show you how our people are sensitive to it. But then again, I think that during the past year, we learned something that is very new, that our people can last for a very long time if we have this joint purpose that we see that is very important. And the hostages are keeping us fighting till the end of our breath, until we'll get them out.
So you don't think there'll be any chance of a ceasefire until those hostages have already returned? Is that what you were saying?
I think that the hostages are one of the goals of this war. We want our citizens alive, not just because the hostages' life, which are a goal of its own, but also for the future of my kids to be free in Israel, to not go into a party and to think that they will be kidnapped and they will be raped and they will be shot. So just for that sake, it's also something that worth keep fighting on. But again, it's a war about Israel's security. You know, we got nothing to do with Yemen, nothing to do with Iran, and you can give some examples of what we have something to do with Hezbollah, but why all of this is happening right now, you know? So this is a war for our existence, for our freedom.
Barak, we have to leave it there, but thank you for coming in to talk to us here at BBC News. Let us continue with looking at so many of the different strands on a day like today. Let's turn to the humanitarian, because Jan Egeland is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Jan, welcome here to the programme. We've spoken many times through the course of the last 12 months. What are your reflections on a day like today?
That it brings back the most painful memories of a day of horror in Israel, where people was, like you just heard, killed in a senseless, horrific way, sheer terror against civilians. That indiscriminate attack has been followed by an indiscriminate military campaign on Gaza, which is a very small area where 2 million people are crammed together with no escape, and with a bombardment that has killed thousands of children, more aid workers than in any other war anywhere on the planet, and so on. So an indiscriminate day of terror was followed by an indiscriminate war, and the world seems to be incapable of stopping this bloodbath.
I'll come back to those wider thoughts in a moment, but just describe, because you're a veteran of so many different humanitarian operations, the scale of what you've had to deal with here this time around.
Well, the point is that it is very concentrated, this place of horror. First in the 2-3 places where Hamas and other Islamic terrorists went rampage in Israel, and then on Little Gaza. I mean, Gaza is smaller than the municipality of Oslo, where I live. In that place, then, we've seen more than two-thirds of every civilian home either fully or partially destroyed. It is unimaginable, the destruction that has been there, with Western-provided bombs. We humanitarian workers have not been able to get in even the aid trucks that are needed for our courageous aid workers that stood there and provided relief for the completely innocent women, children, families inside.
And is that fundamentally different to other crises that so often you've dealt with?
this lack of access for aid, for journalists, and the sealing off of a territory. Well, we saw that also in the Assad war in Syria, that you had besieged areas for a very long time, and the Western nations were outraged of the cruelty of this besiegement tactics. Seen much of the same here. Where can women and children escape from Gaza? So it really pains me, as one who worked for Israeli and Palestinian reconciliation for so many years, to see this polarization of positions and the lack of empathy on what is happening on the innocent on either side.
You will know what the Israelis have said about who they've targeted and blaming Hamas for using all of those civilians as human shields, all of those arguments. But away from that, in terms of the diplomacy, the lack of a ceasefire, is that, do you think, a fundamental failure of statecraft that we've seen?
It is, and of leadership on both sides, really. And listen, it's a fundamental point, is that Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza, Hezbollah and other armed groups in Lebanon, yes, they do blend into the civilian population. I mean, I don't know if the races, they use them as human shields, but they are there in the population. But that does in no way justify smashing a school full of women and children if there are some Hamas fighters somewhere in the vicinity or right under the school. It is still a war crime. It's a war crime to blend into the civilian population. It's a war crime to smash the school with everybody there. This is a fundamental point, and it has been so misconstrued now for a year. It was indiscriminate warfare with indiscriminate bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, for example, provided by the United States.
Jan Egeland, just a final thought, because, of course, we are seeing now a new phase of the conflict in Lebanon. Do you fear a repetition of what we've seen in Gaza? 30 seconds, if you could, because we're nearly out of time.
No, I fear a repetition, but it can end in Lebanon tomorrow with some leadership by the Israeli side, by the armed group side, as it could for Gaza. And what I believe is that it has been overwhelming pressure from the outside world. These parties seem to be unwilling to end this bloodbath, unfortunately.
Jan Egeland, thank you so much for being with us, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, talking to me live here on today's programme, where, of course, we're concentrating in reflecting the commemorations a year on from the October the 7th attacks, and also try to keep right up to date with what is actually happening in the conflict in Lebanon. Let me just tell you the latest in terms of that element of the conflict, because the Israeli army is saying that about 135 projectiles fired by Hezbollah into Israel today, and we know that a number actually managed to get through in Haifa and a variety of other places, but the Israeli army is saying that 135 different projectiles were fired by Hezbollah today into Israel, and we've seen more strikes by the Israelis in different parts of southern Lebanon and also Beirut. We'll have more on that aspect of what we're seeing from the Middle East here in just a moment.